Welcome to the Coptimizer Podcast, a platform dedicated to uncuffing your true potential in public safety. We're here to provide you with valuable tips and insights that will help you optimize your life and career. I'm retired Chief Patrick Flannelly, and I'm honored to be your guide and coach on this journey. Here, I'll share the latest insights and strategies to help you survive and thrive in the demanding world of public safety. Our noble duty is to protect and serve. We embody the role of peacemakers in our communities. However, this profession's immense physical and mental demands come with a price. If we fail to take a proactive approach for our well-being and lead ourselves first, then the stress from the job can and will lead to poor health outcomes. We have all seen it play out. Not only does this impact our professional and personal lives, but it also affects our ability to fulfill this sacred duty. Like many of you, my journey has been filled with tremendous challenges, with highs and lows. However, through creativity, experience, and a positive attitude, I successfully managed over 30 years in law enforcement, emerging healthy and happy. Now, I am driven to share what I've learned to show you that the path is not all doom and gloom. There is hope and a profound purpose in serving your community, and I'm here to show you that it does not have to come at the cost of your health and well-being. Join us as we explore cutting-edge research, interview top experts, and share inspiring stories of transformation. Whether on duty or off, it's time to optimize your potential and live your best life. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered. This is the Coptimizer Podcast. Greetings all. Welcome back to another episode of the Coptimizer Podcast. Got another great guest today. I'm on a roll. I've never had a bad guest, so Lou Barani, unless you're the first bad guest, I'm going to keep my streak going. But I don't anticipate that, and I won't define good or bad. But I'm excited to have this conversation. We got introduced a few years ago between some mutual work that we're doing with Davista Technologies and the Hive platform. We'll get to that later, but this is awesome. So we're going to have a conversation today about modern active shooter prevention, security strategies, and how these changing landscapes, changing technologies, where it's all going, and who better to have a conversation with about this than an expert, a world-class expert such as you. So welcome. I appreciate you spending some of your valuable time with us.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks for having me.
So you've got an interesting background, and I'll let you explain it, but just to kind of set it up, you into the Navy and then into the private security world, and you've done a lot of different work there now, and it's kind of come full circle back around, and we're into this prevention mode, or identifying threats before they become real threats, or as they're becoming real threats, and we'll delve into those things. But if you don't mind, can you give the audience a little bit of your background, and let's set it up and roll into this conversation.
Sure. Graduated from St. John's University, went into the Navy, did 7 years of active duty. Total in the Navy, I did 20 plus years of active duty and reserve. Served in naval special warfare, naval coastal warfare, and naval expeditionary warfare, and naval intelligence. Which will go into this. This is a big part of it. So I got a lot of good training there, got a lot of good tactical training there, and actually some technology training that translated into what I do now. Got out, went into the private sector, started working my way into security in different positions and stuff like that. The Gulf War hit. I went back in the reserves, and 100-hour. I went join the reserves to go to war. 100-hour war. Now I'm stuck for 6 years.
Well, you don't want to miss your chance, right?
Yeah. So I ended up staying in the reserves because it was a lot of fun. And then 9/11 hit, and boom, there I am. I did 4 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, 4 deployments in 6 years. So it was pretty rough on everybody involved and stuff like that, but it turned out all right. On the civilian side, as I said, I worked my way through security. I started working for the Port Authority in New York and New Jersey, and they have most of the major infrastructure, critical infrastructure between New York and New Jersey and the World Trade Center. So prior to being at the World Trade Center, I was the general manager for security programs for the tunnels, bridges, and terminals, airports, ports, and commercial properties. So I had some pretty good learning experience there about critical infrastructure and long-term large civil projects. Going back to the Navy part, and I'm going to hit a couple of things on a tangent, but going back to the Navy part, I was asked to work on a project from OP6 that integrated, and this was in the late 90s, this integrated littoral warfare systems. So it was the first time they were looking at, and this was before Palantir and before PSUMs and everything else.
Yeah.
And it integrated all the battlefield data sources so that they could have situational awareness and a common operating picture. And those are the 2 terms I use quite a bit, but that gave me my first introduction into how integrated systems can provide better informed decision making.
Yeah, so that's okay. I wasn't expecting to go this way, but I'm going to because a couple things just popped right into my head. And first, I have to go all the way back to St. John's before we move on. So, was it the Red Men or the Orange?
No, they were the Red Men then.
Were you there in the Chris Mullen time?
That's exactly when I was there. Yeah.
Oh my
Big
gosh.
East started all that. Yeah.
So, as you can, I'm wearing my Boilers shirt today. I'm in Indiana. I'm a basketball guy, but for those that don't know, I think our younger generation, they may not realize that St. John's was a big, was Lou Carnesecchi and Chris Mullen and the Big East. They were a dominant basketball program for a long time. So
you had Wennington who went
yes,
to Chicago. You had Mark Jackson on that team. So you had
oh my God, that's right. Mark Jackson was on that team.
Yeah, three pretty big starters that went into the NBA. So and it was a fun time. They had just gotten into the Big East, and I was working at a local bar right off campus. So I was kind of in the middle of it. A lot of fun.
Well, is that how you wound up in the Navy?
That's how I paid for my tuition.
I did this. I did a little backwards. I realized I wouldn't make it through college right out of high school. I was having too much fun, so I went for a little maturity streak in the Air Force before I went back to school, and then I worked in a bar. Right, real.
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress. So you're working for Port Authority in the time when we had the first attack on the World Trade Center back in 1990.
I was working in several different things. I did executive protection work for Solomon Brothers. I worked for a company called J. Kirk Barefoot and Associates doing investigations. I worked for a couple of law firms doing investigations. So I was bouncing around a lot. I like to experience different things. I like to learn. So, being in one job was not good for me. So as I went from job to job to job, and actually, I had a family, so I increasing my position and my salary and stuff like that. I learned more and more and more and more, and it started adding up. And then I was working for Kroll, and Port Authority was a big client.
Okay.
And I did some work for them. They wanted to do vulnerability assessments on their airports, and they wanted attacks. So I created a design basis threat on scenarios that would attack the airports, and I showed it to them. They had some vulnerabilities, and a couple months later, they hired me on.
Yeah, so yeah, and I only bring that up because I know a lot of people forget about that. Like that's kind of like one of these weird moments in history that just oftentimes, because 9/11 was such a cataclysmic event, just um, that you that sometimes people forget that we had a little, it was a shot across the bow. We had an attempt. It was an unsuccessful attempt, but it still caused a lot of damage and destruction. But it also shifted the way that we started thinking about security, about terrorism.
Yeah.
I don't think we evolved fast enough. I don't think we truly appreciated how the threat itself was evolving. Um, but it's like you can kind of take some of the looking back. I guess it's an interesting thought exercise, if nothing else, thinking about how we viewed terrorism in the same way that we kind of viewed active shooters, and particularly, I think what we'll evolve into today is active shooters in and how it's impacting schools primarily, but also workplaces and others. And it's you know hope is not a plan, and having a strategy that you're testing, that you're implementing, that you're training on, that you're just constantly evolving, I think is critical. And I'm trying to remember the name of the book that I read, because I started my policing career in '95, and I started my I tried out and made our SWAT team in, it was '97, '98 timeframe. So that was, we're right around the Columbine time. We're a few years past this event at the World Trade Center. So we're starting to think a little bit, bigger picture, evolving threats. How is this going to impact our, our tactical operations, what we need to think about locally, all that stuff. So I'm sure that was, kind of back of mind for you. So you wind up deployed in the first Gulf War. You come back, you do that work, and then you mentioned you did future deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan with the Navy. Um, where were you on 9/11?
I was at that point, it was right in between going to work for the Port Authority and working for Kroll. And I was in one of the towers when it happened. So it was a big impact. I come from a neighborhood in Queens, so I had a lot of friends that were firemen and cops. So, that event, and everybody has a story. Everybody, has something, some touch point to there. But it was pretty bad. I went to a lot of funerals. I didn't like it. I didn't like the idea of us being attacked. So I didn't have a problem when I was in the reserves, and I didn't have a problem when I got called up. So it it impacted me pretty significantly. It was a huge turn in my life, because all of a sudden that created the need for me to turn from just a purely security guy, and even the attack on in '93 at the World Trade Center, the first attack. I mean, I was working for Solomon Brothers then, and they were in Tower 7. So, they were concerned about everything, but I also learned a lot afterwards. Again, I'm sorry I'm going on a tangent, but if you remember the trial from the first attack,
Yeah.
All the engineering that went into the World Trade Center came out in that trial. So a lot of the lessons learned for 9/11 came from that trial, how the building was built. They didn't understand that there were no big columns in the middle of the building. It was platforms, it was slabs held together by trestles and an exoskeleton. And they created that so there would be more room inside, more usable room inside the floors. If you look at a modern building, you'll see columns all over the place interfering with space and stuff like that. And what the architect for the World Trade Center, he created these buildings so that there would be no obstructions, and it would just be a central core and then the workspaces around it. So, and the other really interesting thing that a lot of people don't know about, that terrorists bought the materials, built the bomb, rented a truck, put the bomb in a truck, drove the truck down to the World Trade Center and detonated it. And in the trial, in the first verdict, the Port Authority was 66% liable for the attack because they didn't take the recommendations of a security consultant that said put an arm on the roadway. So now, when I got to the Port Authority and I started working on security, and this was post 9/11, everything we looked at was in the prism of liability. Obviously, we had to do everything we could to save lives, but we also had to look at it in terms of liability. So that was a huge learning curve. And the other big learning curve for me from the World Trade Center was that we had to put together a defensive strategy, and we had NYPD, the PAPD, we had the New York City Fire Department, we had all these different agencies, and everybody was looking at what we were going to do, and there was a huge learning curve for me for what was available. When I took over at the World Trade Center for the security there, that was the time period when the NYPD had cars outside each gate, and the PAPD had cars inside each gate, because Commissioner Kelly didn't like the security that was going on there. I mean, it was a construction site, and we had iris scans for 10,000 construction workers that had to go in every day. So, it was just an interesting point, and I was getting access to DHS Science and Technology, and I was looking at all the technology that was available at the think tanks, the contractors for the government, universities, all that stuff. So it took what I learned about integration, started to learn in the Navy with that littoral warfare issue, and then brought it to another level. And it was right about that time that physical security information systems were coming out. And these were supposed to be the next big thing. They were, and this will lead to our conversation with Davista and Hive. And this was going to be the next big thing. You can integrate all these different systems and get situational awareness and a common operating picture, which was the issue, one of the issues from the 9/11 Commission. Nobody knew what was going on.
Yeah. Well, and I would like to say things are better today, but if I'm being honest, like when it comes to interoperability, they're not nearly as good as they should be. We're still siloed. And it's better, but we still have a lot of room for improvement. And you mentioned a couple of things. I want to explain what they are, because for listeners that may not have listened, you've met my friend Todd Langley, and you guys have had an opportunity to speak, and you guys have somewhat similar backgrounds in special operations. Todd when I met him back in 2000 and I think it was 2015, the first time I met him through a mutual friend, we got into this discussion about situational awareness and common operating pictures. And, the vernacular was not very, I'd heard it and I understood the concept, but it's not discussed very often in policing. And it certainly wasn't discussed, at least in my areas, in the training that I had been through in terms of how it would apply to active shooter response, whether that's, again, in a school, workplace, wherever. But what we all struggle with, in and I'm just going to speak with like municipal law enforcement here, working with our local partners and the state police and even our like local federal partners, like not like your like FBI DC, but your RA out of your local area. When we would run these large training scenarios where you're trying to bring in fire and rescue, police from 6, 7 different agencies, other maybe some law enforcement professionals, FBI, and what you find in these scenarios is that it's very difficult to communicate across platforms. And then on top of that, you can't see. Like we didn't have these visual tools that now are available to us today. So you had to really pay attention to know where everybody else was. And so what a common operating picture will do is it will take a platform and it will ingest different data sources. Some of it might be GPS, tools like ATAC, things like that,
Yeah.
where you can see where everyone else is. And and the easier way to describe it from a cop's perspective, sitting in a squad car is your MDT that has CAD data that has
Right.
geolocation on, um, where the router in the car is, what's hitting the internet. And, so those things have evolved. So that's common operating picture is getting everybody on the same page through disparate technologies, all connected. And then, from a command perspective, whether you're at the TOC or the incident command post, whatever, those things are all vitally important to be able to help you make decisions. They help you visualize where your resources are, where your gaps are, what your needs are,
Yeah.
and that goes up and down. And then situational awareness is part of that concept of the cop, right? If for the operator that's on the ground, for the officer that's on the ground, the more information they have, the sooner they get it. With the time and the ability to process it in an organized fashion, that allows them to make better decisions. And so, it's when you have these environments are very decentralized. As much as they need to be centralized, you always have to have those command post environments where you have small groups of people that are making your your high level decisions. They have to understand what's going on, but it's until you have a scene secure, it's always going to be the operators on the ground that are impacting all of those upper level decisions. So it's a that's about a 2 minute explanation for something that we could probably literally spend a week discussing and training on. And it's kind of one of these things that's when you're training on the ground in a physical environment, force on force training, those, which is always going to be critically important. You learn a lot. Um, but those are difficult environments to train in all the time, just from a logistics perspective. So we have to find ways to be able to do that in a more efficient and effective way. Take those, learn those things in a safe, repetitive environment where we can learn lessons and then go apply them to these larger scale exercises because that brings added value to those big exercises. So thinking about that, thinking about that now, and then like you apply that to scale, like a place like New York City, like the Port Authority, um, it's it just becomes more critical to ensure that you're organized, that your approach is as bulletproof as you can make it, and that you understand that it's always evolving. Like, and on my last point, and I'll shut up. And the point there is, right, you're talking about the 93 bombing. Not only did we learn something about that attack, but the enemy learned from that attack. They learned what didn't work, and we released all these documents into the wild, and they got a second chance, right? If at first
Yeah.
you do not succeed, try and try again. And, there's a naivety to us that sometimes, well, oh, that didn't work, so it'll never happen again. It's like, no, that's just not the way, it's not the way the world works, and certainly not the way a, you know, a very committed and, terrorist thinks. So I'll
Oh
shut up.
yeah, they wanted this. They wanted those buildings, and they were going to do everything. And the construction part, I mean, if you look at it, if you look at the attack, it's pretty significant because they figured out the engineering, they figured out how to compromise that engineering, and they figured out how to bring it down.
Yeah, so these are not just, dumb idiot jihadis, crawling around in the mountains wearing robes, right? They're
Yeah.
very, very smart. It's like the cartels. I say this all the time. People like, for some, I don't know why, but for some reason, like the general population just thinks that the cartels are, just, a bunch of thugs. And sure, there's a lot of thuggery that goes on with cartels, but these are multi-billion dollar operations. They have some of the smartest, brightest, most technically advanced uh, people in the world on their payrolls. And, it's kind of silly. It's kind of silly how sometimes the general population just doesn't think about these threats in this way. We need to be investing our best into this. So, this is all to say, look, I feel very honored to have you on the podcast to talk about this. Your expertise it's really second to none. Your experience is second to none. So when you talk, I really want people to understand, like this is a guy I need to listen to because he knows what the fuck he's talking about. And I don't say the F bomb on here very often. That may be my first F bomb on my own podcast, but
I'm honored.
I use it for I use it for point of emphasis. It's not the first time I've used it in my own personal vernacular. I probably use it too much, but I try to avoid it. But anyway, all that being said, now you've got a front row seat to all these converging uh, lessons, technologies, real world workspace in the place where it means the most, right? Where like right at the heart of America. Um, so where do we go from there?
Well, in hindsight, what the PSIMs didn't have, and I'm writing some papers on that right now. They didn't have AI to be able to take and manage all that data. So, between the complexity of managing the changes to software, that was a big one too, because all these different systems had different upgrade schedules of software. And to maintain those upgrades in the PSIM was a significant task. So, I mean, to get that interoperability was a difficult path. And I retired from Port Authority in 2012. And we were getting the systems ready for the anniversary. That was a great system. I mean, we had cameras. We had at the construction site, we had three 29 megapixel cameras monitoring 16 acres. And I could read a guy's nameplate from 500 yards away. So
Nice.
it was, and we had retinal scans for all the workers and stuff like that. And it just as the buildings, the way they were built was, especially Tower One. I mean, that thing is going to be significantly hard to come down.
Yeah, and yeah, it's I've only been there once, and it was I just happy I had a nephew that was getting married, and my wife and I just made a point to be there. Got to tour the facilities, the 9/11 memorial, but it was also um, the day where they were having the law enforcement bagpipe parade right in
Oh
the area.
yeah,
So it was
yeah,
very, very memorable day for me.
yeah.
So, uh,
I mean, we had the system working for what we had. The hard part, I think, came for the guys after me when they had to create and the thing that ran all this integration were business rules, workflows. And the guys after me, as the buildings came on, as more technology came on, as cameras came in, they had to write the work rules and workflow for that. So they had although they had some pretty good technology, I don't think it was very easy for them. But that was the state of the technology, and that's what we had to do.
and and again, different scale, different scope, but for an officer that's sitting in a squad car today, I have, it was always one of my goals as a chief was to provide the best tools that I could to our officers, but to also simplify processes as much as we could. Um, because I worked, I spent, 14 years, as either as an officer, a lieutenant, or a sergeant, like on the street. And there's nothing more frustrating than like when you go into work and you have to log into 4 or 5 different systems, and then those systems don't talk to each other. And and then like you were saying earlier, like you have touch points where things have to be updated, and uh, you know, it's the frustrating part of technology, and it's easy to kind of get lost in that frustration. But at the same time, you also have to kind of also take a step back and appreciate what you do have,
Yeah,
because that technology, it was even then evolving so rapidly, and even today, we're in warp speed,
oh
right
yeah.
now. Like we are about ready to go. I don't know, what is it, hyperspace or I'm not a big Trekkie, but I do like to make Star Trek references from time for whatever reason. Like I guess it's because I grew up on it, but that's what I think about. When the Enterprise is getting ready to hit light speed and all the stars go. If
Yeah,
you're
I think
sitting in
that's Star Wars.
well, yeah, Star Wars too, right? Yeah. Well, anyway. Uh,
Just to tee this up for you, when we talk about the technology we have now for active shooter, and then how that can translate into a bigger picture for corporate security, it will explain everything we just talked about: the situational awareness, the common operating picture, and the interoperability, which was a big deal for me. 9/11, we had a 9/11 commission. Interoperability was a big thing. DHS came along and they opened up the Office of Interoperability, and we still don't have interoperability. Everybody's still exchanging radios. And that's one of the things that I've been looking at for active shooter response. How do we get people on the same page? And that's part of the technology we'll talk about when we get into that aspect of it. But it's pretty exciting now. For a paper and pencil guy, this is great stuff.
well, analog, no one's ever going to convince me, and I think the data and the science is there that learning in an analog way is still the best way to retain information. However, it's I think where the advantage is when you combine these two, right? When you have a hybrid learning environment, and that's where I think things like augmented reality, AI, combined with the right type of analog learning, again, that's probably a conversation for another day. But
I'll tell you a story. When we were getting the systems up during construction, and the buildings were at the World Trade Center, and the buildings were going up, and we had more and more responsibility, and we were shutting some things down, and they had to be secured. We had the SOC, and it was pretty advanced for the time. And my vision was to have a PAPD, NYPD, and an FDNY guy there, taking all this information. All the fire information would go to the fire department. The police departments would have all the situational awareness coming in from the cameras and stuff like that, alarms. And these guys, no offense to them, but they were looking at it like, oh my God. And uh, uh, at one point, this lady that I knew brought in her nephew, 17 years old, was in high school. And she just wanted him to see all this. We had a big, huge sock. And he's looking at it and he's watching some people work it. And I'm looking at him and he's looking and he's moving and his eyes are going. And I said, you know how to work this, don't you? He goes, yeah, I think I can figure it out. And that solved the problem because I had to get a gamer to be able to use this and get the information out to all the different people because our analog guys, my contemporaries, the cops, the firemen, and et cetera, we're all analog. And they had this
Oh
big
man.
complex system. So I got a kid at the time I was teaching a course in risk management. And one of the students was always asking, what can I do with you? And I got him in there and he was like, yeah, this is great. Boom, 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 boom. He actually got a second job at Giant Stadium manipulating the CCTV system there so they could pick out fights and stuff like that. But it took a young man to be able to, or a younger person that was brought up in this, gamer world instead of just an analog TV where you change the channels.
I might actually be able to get my kids to listen to this episode when I tell them like, hey, we there was a positive thing about gaming mentioned.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this kid was he got it right away.
Yeah.
He got it. His fingers were moving, his eyes were moving. He's asking what is this control? What is that control? And in 5 minutes, he sat down in the second chair and was manipulating everything, and that solved a huge problem for me. But
Yeah, and so I that's a great point to bring up because while I do like to poke fun at my kids because I think they spend too much time. Uh, I have three boys, and they all love to game. They grew up gaming, and so I like to say that maybe they spend a little too much time there. But well, I'll tell you this: my middle son, who when he was in middle school, he's now an electrical engineering student. So anyone out there looking for an electrical engineering intern, let me know. He's a senior at Purdue. When he was in middle school, he used to go to these LAN parties, like they called them LAN parties because the kids, the first time he's going to it, he walks out of the house with a gigantic backpack, and I'm like, what are you carrying? He's got his whole computer with him, like he built his own computer. He's got the whole thing, like not a laptop, but like a desktop computer. I'm like, what are you doing? He was like, oh, we're having a LAN party. I'm like, what's a LAN party? So that's when he explained it to me. But I used to try to tell him he was spending too much time. Now, the kid that used to host those LAN parties, um, when he was in high school, he his dad let him drop out of high school, became a professional gamer, and actually was on like the gaming circuit and won a Fortnite tournament, like like a $2 million prize. I was like, my kids now are like, you see, gaming does pay. And so now not only does it pay like what, that might be a fractional percentage, right? But there are other applications, and that, quite frankly, um, I just had a very similar conversation not too long ago about when we rolled out our new CAD and records management system. The UX exchange. There's so much more user intuitive, like it, and so old guys can pick those things up and learn pretty quick, and young guys generally don't even need any training. That like
right.
they just know, like they already they've already learned how these things operate. So yeah, fun little tangent there. So you've got these big security operations centers. We got information coming from everywhere. You got it coming from cameras. You got it coming from multiple radios. Uh, I can't even imagine how many different organizations that you had to try to manage in one center. Uh, I spent some time and visited Chicago's center, a few years ago, and that was everything's a matter of scale, right? So
Yeah.
what we like to call real-time crime centers now are really gaining a lot of momentum in policing. Uh, I think people need to be really careful about how they approach real-time crime centers, especially depending on the size of your agency. And you really, anytime you're going to involve yourself in developing one of these facilities, you really have, it's that process of begin with the end in mind, right? Like, what do you want to do with it? But you also have to build for the future. And that's kind of what I want to talk about next is like the future. So you've got this background and some very hard lessons learned in addition to that, right? So, and we talked a little bit about this before we came on, like in policing, sometimes it's not just policing. I think it's just kind of a comfort thing in general. Like we'll tend to focus on things that we have a certain level of expertise and experience with. So, like for example, if you have a chief that has a very strong tactical background, maybe they were a SWAT team member for years, they may approach an active shooter response protocol with an emphasis on the individual operator and small team dynamics. Like, how do you clear a building? What are your shooting skills like? What are your ground fighting skills like? How are you move, shoot, and communicate? The basic stuff on the ground. And because that's their area of comfort and their area of expertise, they may focus too much time there and not think about like, well, what's the big picture? Um,
Yeah.
how do we, when we have an active shooter response, where are we going to set up the tactical command post? Where's the incident command post going to go? Where are our triage sites going to go? And because they may not have experience there, they either ignore it or they assign it to somebody else to work on. And if we don't spend enough time understanding all of the pieces, then we miss opportunities. And that's just one agency, right? And so now, like any active shooter response is going to be multi-jurisdictional. So if we're not preparing in that environment, um, then we're missing opportunities. And next we got to even start thinking about technology. So you've got the ground expertise, being the knuckle dragger on the ground who's done it there, and all the way up to the highest level where we're working on one of the most sensitive and threat response locations in the world. And now you're working in this space with us, sharing your experience and your expertise on how do where you're taking all these lessons that you've learned over a career and bringing it back down to active shooter response, active shooter, and maybe I'd like to say active shooter prevention as well.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
And so let's dive in. Let's the go from these. Yeah, let's look maybe at these proactive prevention strategies and how you see AI and data aggregation and all these things to be able to identify threats early. Um, and we can spend the next half hour or so talking about that because that's what we were getting on the call to talk about.
Yeah. No, this is great timing because just a little bit of background. My last 8 years, I retired from a pretty big insurance company in June. And for 8 years there, I was the global terrorism risk consultant. So I would go to clients that have terrorist insurance with our company, and I would see how they were positioned against terrorist attacks. And one of them obviously was active shooter. So I was constantly looking at the active shooter space and the environment, scenarios, different types, and I was looking at the historical aspect of it, how people responded, what happened in Columbine, what happened in Parkland, and all that. So for the last 8 years, I've been studying this problem and looking at what technology, because obviously we've been doing the same thing for 25 years and people are still getting killed. So, what can I do? What can I think through to do this. And a couple of years ago, Scott Saraki from Davista and I ran into each other at ISC West. Scott was one of the vendors at the World Trade Center, so I've known him for a while. And he introduced me to Dr. Abish Malik, who was the founder of Davista. And they explained to me that at that time they had a security and a police capability for hot mapping and predictive analysis for policing and security, which you were one of the innovators and early adapters for. But they explained this to me, and at that time, active shooter was a big deal for me. And I asked them, can you look for indicative behaviors in data? And this goes to a larger strategy that I'm thinking about. I'm always thinking about end to end, how to try to prevent it, and then if it can't prevent it, how to respond. So the preventative part, I think, is the most important part. Since Columbine, since 2002, the Department of Education and Secret Service put out a report that said intervention and identifying indicative behaviors, which is anger, behavior traits, bad school, all those different things. You can find it in the FBI report, in multiple FBI reports and stuff like that. They put out 20 indicative behaviors that active shooters present. Now, the Violence Project also did a study on this, and they put out statistics that said as someone gets down the pathway to violence, and I'll explain that, they exhibit more and more of these indicative behaviors. So the pathway to violence, simply put, is a grievance, an ideation, a preparation, and implementation. So these kids are bullying me. God, I want to kill these kids. I'm going to get a gun and kill these kids, and the actual implementation. Now that could take weeks, months, and years. And within that time, these indicative behaviors and violent ideation are being apparent. And that's when you see the articles after every shooting. Something was wrong. He was off. You have the kid had puppies on his screensaver, and then he had AK-47s. And these are all indices of behavior and someone going down the pathway to violence. And I asked Scott and Dr. Malik if they could pick that out of scholastic information, and they said they could. So yep. we developed this capability to do this, and we did a couple of pilot projects, and now we're at the point where we're ready to implement. Now, the second part, the response. We can look at kids, for indicative behaviors, but some of them may not go to that school. We may not be able to access their records. So somebody's going to get through. So how do you make a better response? How do you increase the chances of survivability? So we're working with this other company called Hive Logic, and they have an integration overlay that's also AI driven. So now you have prevention driven by AI and response driven by AI. And one of the things I asked them, could they identify a shooter? And they said, with the technology that schools buy, and let me make a really big point here. Schools are buying significant amounts of technology, and they're not leveraging the intelligence and the data from those. There's a firewall between the security data and the first responders. So I realized we have to break that, and we have to get this information. So by taking Hive and integrating it with AI, we're able to integrate the different systems the schools have already invested in, and we're able to identify a shooter either through straight CCTV, through gunshot detection, or through weapons identification. Now, if it's both, we get a confirmation, and now we have picture an active shooter event. Active shooter comes on, either shoots or presents a gun. The system alarms, takes a snapshot of that person and sends it to first responders. And this is all pre-planned, led out with the corresponding police departments and stuff like that. They get the initial, let's say it goes to dispatch for argument's sake, goes to dispatch. Dispatch sends that out. So now the first responders have a way to identify the shooter and understand if there's one or two shooters and what they're carrying. The next thing I asked Hive to be able to do was track the person throughout the school. And they're able to do that through the CCTV system. So now you have first responders responding, understanding and knowing what the shooter looks like. And this can go to a phone, it can go to a tablet, it can go to a computer, it can go to an ATAC on their chest, however they want it. But now they have a picture of the shooter or shooters, and they're tracking them through the school. So now the contact officers can tactically come in and get to the shooter faster and quicker. That does two things. Number one, it turns the hot zone behind the contact officers into a warm zone.
Right.
And that allows, which is a huge pet peeve of mine, that allows EMTs or fire department or anybody to come in, or other police officers to come in and triage the wounded, because it kills me that we can't get to these people who are bleeding out because of the tactics we're using. And there's really no other tactic you can use, but now we have a way to get to and triage the folks who are bleeding out. And number two, that allows the evacuation officers to have a more efficient and effective evacuation when they know where the shooter is and how he's being corralled. Now that gives you what? Situational awareness and a common operating picture. So anybody that's involved has that picture. Now, the interoperability part. In a tactical situation, communication should be within the tactical team. Corresponding police departments can sign into the system with a login, with a secure login, and that information comes down to their ATAC, their phone, or whatever. So now you have different departments having that interoperability and that common operating picture of understanding where the shooter is, et cetera. So, and we have a couple of pilot projects starting, and I think this is going to be that end-to-end solution that we've been trying to see to cut down on as many deaths as we can.
Yeah, it's so exciting. It's so exciting to see. And oftentimes, like, over the last 5, 6 years, really last decade, it's been kind of tough to be a cop, right? Like a lot of abuse coming down. But I still say, like, there is no better time, no more exciting time than to get into this profession because of the tools that are coming available, and the opportunities that it's going to present. I guess the sad or downside to that is the understanding and the reality that these, responding and preparing for these types of incidents, they're accelerating. They're not going away. And so I think just as a country, we just need to stop having these, arguments about, like it always, everything, it's so predictable, right? Because like the media likes to touch on the emotional things like guns. Like, well, if they didn't have access to guns, this wouldn't happen. And like, I don't want to get into an argument about guns, but yeah, that's true. Yeah, if a suspect doesn't have a gun, he can't use a gun. But if someone's determined enough, it might be something else, and maybe it's something less lethal. Maybe it's something more lethal. So either way, the preparation has to be the same.
Think about the pathway to violence. You have the grievance, you have the ideation, and what's next? The preparation. How am I going to do this? Okay, it's easy for me to get a gun. I'll use that. What about arson? What about a knife? What about running people over? This is all in the news. They can copycat it right from there. I mean, a determined person taking a life is a profound act unless you're a psychopath. And it takes a lot to get you to the point that you want to kill. And if you get to that point, you're going to find a way to do it.
And there's a lot of and like that pathway, think about that. So, if you're a leader and you're listening to this, it's like, and I do another project on the side where I work on insulin resistance in the first responders. The number one killer of cops is cardiovascular disease. And I'm going to make this analogy. It's not even close. Like 18 times the number of fatalities from heart attack than from being attacked by an assailant. Um, Yet it doesn't matter where I go when I do this training, and I ask my groups. I'm like, hey, how many? Raise your hand if you've been through EVOC, your driving training this year. Everyone raise your hand if you've gone through your defensive tactics and your firearms. Yep. Raise your hand if you've gone through your heart attack prevention training and program.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what? Like that's not our job. They're like that. You're like, what do you mean heart attack? And so it's you got the point is like Greenie and I, Doc Greenwald, who I work with that project on, it's the idea like at some point you got to look upstream, instead of pulling bodies out of the river, as they're drowning, you got to find out where they're falling in or jumping in. And that's what that pathway, that's a good visualization for this process. And what Heimdall is doing through Davista is taking those, again, a lot of these disparate systems and connecting them in the same way that we do it for um, trying to build predictive analytics algorithms on where crimes might occur, where they are occurring, what people might likely be involved and engaged in these things. Well, how do we learn that? Well, we learn it from what they've already done. Past behavior is the best predictor of what might happen in the future. So is and again, some people, if they don't take the time to just kind of soak this stuff in and let it percolate, think about it, then they can put up barriers and, oh, this is ridiculous, no, like there's no software that's ever going to tell me to be at this corner, at this intersection, at this time, like, and applying it to a school, like no software is ever going to tell me to go to this school, to this door at this time so I can be there to prevent the shooting from happening. And it's like, well, that's not the point of it, right? The point of it is to get us as close to that as we can in a predictive model that allows us to run training scenarios and preparation where we can harden the target in some aspects, but also, look for these softer opportunities to intervene. So if like on a pathway to violence, if you have, let's just use some examples and that we've talked about with Scott Nobish and others, right? If if you're able to connect with certain school datas and you're able to anonymize the data so you can protect things like HIPAA protections, other school sensitive documents, there are ways to say like, well, this person is like student Johnny is, he was in a very like in a normal category, very low risk, but over the last 6 months, his absenteeism has increased. He's been involved in three disciplinary actions with fights. In our local area, we call it Quest. That we have a system where our schools are connected to our local police departments. So if you have domestic violence incidents or things like that may have traumatic incidents for children that are school aged in the home, then the schools can get notified of that. So if, there's behavioral issues or a kid's showing up late, things like that, all of the stuff that we're talking about. Well, now instead of like just ignoring that, there's an opportunity for intervention. There's an opportunity to have the school counselor uh, bring Johnny in and sit him down and take a look at Johnny and say, "Hey, what's going on? Like,
Yeah.
what's happening here? What services can I provide to intervene?" And I say this because it's no different than what a good progressive law enforcement leader is already doing in their data-driven crime prevention approach to uh, their communities. Like
Right.
you're trying to understand what's happening. We're trying to narrow down into that 2% of the people that are driving 95% of our workload. Maybe it's because they're mentally ill, they're undiagnosed, and they're now addicted to heroin or meth, and they're committing car burglaries and house burglaries and robberies because they're fueling addiction. Well, yeah, most cops, this is the pathway that we watch. It's no different than the kid who might wind up eventually becoming an active shooter. And
Yeah.
the solution is, well, let's catch him and throw him in jail, lock away the key, and move on. Well,
Yeah.
no, that's like I think that's I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, right? If it gets to that point and you can't intervene, well, locking somebody up forever, that should be kind of viewed as a failure on, the individual's part first and foremost, like no individual accountability, but also kind of on the system in which he's operating in. I'd much rather get to that guy when he's committed his first, second, third burglary, been arrested, 4 or 5 times, with dope on him, and get him in a program where we're getting him clean and then we're pushing him into a recovery program. Yeah, so that might
Yeah.
mean locking him up for a year, but that's better than 2 years later locking him up for life. So these are the long-term costs, and that like there is nothing I think more important than identifying who these potential shooters are, getting it, and they may not ever get evolved to that point, right? But there's still opportunities to intervene in a positive way to get them into the right services and get them turned around, get them into the right track, get them the resources that they need to be successful. And boom, that's about as simple as I can put it, I think.
Yeah, a couple of things that you made some really, really good points. Couple of things. The privacy laws, HIPAA, FERPA, all that stuff.
Yep.
The system is non-biased. The Davista system, Heimdall, is non-biased. It doesn't look at demographics. It doesn't look at sex. It doesn't look at anything. The school provides a random identification number, and the system looks for those behaviors coming from that number, from the systems associated with that number. And now here's the important thing. From there, the school sets up a threshold for how many of these indicative behaviors they're willing to tolerate. And when it hits that threshold, that gets sent over to the threat assessment or threat management team. They have the capability, they have the mental health professionals, they have the law enforcement professionals, and they have the capability to go into social media and other additional indicators that will create a more refined profile of the person and what the condition is. Number two, the indicative behaviors that an active shooter shows and presents are the same indicative behaviors that a suicide victim presents. One internalizes it, one externalizes it. So you're not only looking for active shooters, you're looking for potential individual in crisis for suicide. The other thing is when we did the pilot projects, we had several different layers of severity on the indicative behaviors. And when we gave them, and they looked at the associated names, they saw that, yeah, we know the people in the red. They're the ones that are acting up. They're our troublemakers. What we didn't know was we knew the 11 in red. We didn't know the 37 in the next layer and the 15 in the other that were having problems.
Yep.
So that provides a huge situational awareness for the school. And then when we spoke to some of the folks in the threat assessment and threat management teams, they said they couldn't manage the amount of data coming out. It was one report from this system, one report here, anecdote here, and they couldn't keep track of putting it all together. AI brings that all together on a constant basis, so nothing slips through the cracks. And my last point, threat assessment teams and threat management teams are mandated, some by states, some by schools, but every school pretty much has to have one. So the fact that now they have the capability to be able to look at these indicative behaviors and help individuals in crisis before they go down that pathway to of violence, I think it is a godsend, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, and here's the reality. This is where we're going. This is where we have to go. And I often hear people like they like there's like a negative vibe with a lot of people around AI because they're hyper focused on the potential negatives that could come from like mismanaged or poorly managed development of AI. All legitimate concerns, but we also have to focus on the value and the benefit that these technologies are going to bring. And I've uh, I don't know that I've ever really mentioned this on the podcast before, but yeah, I've done, and when I was the chief, I did a lot of development work with Axon in some of their early product interventions. And I'll just use them as a case example. I know there's probably others that are doing this. It's just my own experiences. Um, you know, I was fortunate enough to be exposed to people like Abish, like, and you mentioned him earlier. Abish and I have known each other since 2008, and I have talked about him in the podcast before. And I knew him when he was a PhD candidate, going through his computer science program at Purdue, because my former chief, he used to hand out what we called roses, where he'd walk around the building, and you're a commander. If he popped into your office, you knew you were probably getting a rose. And then, today we're recording this episode on Valentine's Day, so how apropos, right? Like, one of his roses for me was, "Hey, I need you to go over to Purdue and talk to Dave Ebert, who's a professor in computer science over there. He's got this Department of Homeland Security project that they're working on, and they're looking for subject matter experts from local law enforcement. I had a tactical background. I talked about this on another podcast for patrol allocation and building algorithms. And this is actually something that I worked with Abish on. And it was a completely it was again one of these things, like once you get exposed to some of these technologies and where they're going, it's like the old saying, right? Like never, like don't close doors on opportunities, because if you step in through one door, now you have two. When you step in another one, if you keep stepping through these doors and being open to these opportunities, like the world will open up for you. And I've just been very fortunate to be in a university town with some incredibly bright people who are willing and just want to work with public safety and others to make our schools safer, to make our communities safer. And I had a very similar experience when I went to Axon. And there was a guy that worked there. He's not there anymore, but I got into a conversation with him. He has a similar background to you, and man, it was just like it's so exciting to see like some of the brightest minds that are trying to solve these problems. And we've come a long way in 10 years. It's crazy
God,
how
yeah.
far we've come. And now we're just right on the precipice of, again, like I said, I'm sorry, I just get excited when I think about this stuff. Um,
When I'm working with Davista and Hive, I see what we've done with the school and the ability to scale it to the next level. I mean, this is a quantum leap to be able to use predictive security and predictive policing. Let me give you an example. Think about the Olympics and putting these two capabilities together.
right.
Think about the ability to look at hotspots on a minute by minute basis, to be able to pull in data from cameras, from metadata from cameras, social media. All of a sudden, there's a bunch of social media activity, meet over here. Think about the ability for police to be able to react with that predictive analysis capability. And then think about the ability to even take it further than they are now, because we have integration with cameras, and we have cameras on top of light poles and all that, but there's no real AI driving it. Think about the capability of the AI driving the severity of it, the prioritization, and then getting people to the right place and getting information to the right people at the right time for informed decision making. Think about incident command, having the ability to pull in information from different sources and have a better understanding, better situational awareness of what's going on the ground, and then a common operating picture that takes in a bigger landmass or a bigger operating environment. That's where we are right now. We're not quite there. I think we have it, in my opinion, with this Hive and Davista consolidation and coordination, and they're coming out with something at ISC West. And I encourage anybody, who's interested in this to go take a look at it, because this is going to go, and there's going to be early adapters like you with the Davista product and predictive policing that are going to take this and get it going. But I think this is the next capability to be able to manage huge amounts of data in its simplest form and be able to get information out, and the interoperability problem. I think that can be solved as well, especially for large events like the Olympics, and you have interoperability problems, and who's going to have a radio, and what black box are you going to use, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, I've got a lot of ideas about that too. I've spent the last 10 years thinking about this stuff. I can't help it. I'm not going to dive into all those today, but what you mentioned something I want to just touch on, and then we'll wrap this up for today. There's massive amounts of information. So think about this from a law enforcement, just from not even a security perspective, right? But a law enforcement perspective. We're in this decade where we have declining number of officers that are just young people that are interested in this profession, and declining numbers of officers that are out there. Yet the demand on police services is increasing. So, you've got these if you think about a line graph, right? These they're going in the wrong direction. So what that does is it puts more pressure on the existing workforce that you have, because you have to be able to sort, prioritize, and categorize all of these things. You just can't ignore your calls for service. And so the tendency for leaders is when demand is outreaching their ability to meet that expectation. Well, what happens, right? We cut services. That's where we see some of these. All you have to do, jump on LinkedIn, read like police departments are consolidating, they're closing down because there's not enough officers. Police are saying, hey, we're no longer going to respond to these types of crimes. Where do you go with all that? And it's actually it's the complete wrong approach. Well, how do you fix that? Because it takes 2 years to hire someone and get them to a base level of operational expertise, a base level, not a 10, 20-year veteran, just a base level. So you have to look for innovative technology solutions that can fill these gaps, that can eliminate administrative tasks and processes that take up so much time. So here's where it's going. We don't need to cut calls. We don't need, because that's the wrong approach, because every call you don't go to is a data point that you miss. And every data point that you miss in the future of AI is a missed link, of a missed opportunity to connect dots that you otherwise might have connected sooner. And for an individual person, you just can't if I'm a street cop and I'm working in an environment where I'm running call to call all day long, there's only so much information I can keep in my head at the same time. AI never forgets. It never forgets what you did last night, last week, last month, last year. And so it's going to understand what you're doing. It can take every single day. It can run through all that information. The more data we have, the better. So you're never going to replace people, because you need the people to interpret the data and to make human responses to what data is telling us. You have to have those safeguards, but the opportunity is there. That's where we're going. And I'm going to turn it over to you for some final comments, and then we'll shut this baby down for the day and think about
Okay. Yeah, and you touched on it. The big thing, the thing that's going to get us into this next level, the quantum leap, is the capability for autonomous thought from the AI. Get the mundane tasks out of the way and leave the high level response critical tasks to the individuals to make it, and give them the information, give them the SOPs, give them everything they need right in front of them to be able to make informed decisions. That's one of the keys. And I'll close with one thing. Success can't be ignored. My understanding is you cut incidents like rape, robbery, etc., by 40%.
Oh yeah, we cut our robberies by I think almost 60% in 2 years.
Yeah, think about what a force multiplier that is, and
Yep.
how you can deal better with that kind of capability. And also on the security side, a couple of the clients for Davista, they were able to cut security incidents by 30-40%. And those are not numbers you can just brush away. Those are significant numbers. That's how you
Yeah.
get past this.
Yeah, it's not by chance, right? It's
Right.
it's very intentional.
Or hope.
And yeah, exactly. It's a very and guess what? Sometimes you're going to meet resistance to these types of strategies and the introduction to these new technologies. But look, nothing doing is, I don't know, like nothing worthwhile is ever easy, right? Like it's the harder you work at it, the more rewarding something tends to be. And
Yeah.
and I truly appreciate people like you that are willing to take your expertise and your time and share it with us in public safety. People like Abish, who, just one of the smartest people I've ever met. It's like, yeah, I'd love to be able to translate the street side to him. I feel like I'm providing some value there, but it's really cool, right? And for those companies that are out there that are willing to engage in this, because my last I've been on my soapbox here lately. In this Doge environment, right? Everybody's worried about what's getting cut. And I'm like, damn, I look at all this money that we've been throwing around, like just through USAID alone. And I've made this argument for the last couple of years. I'm like, man, if we could ship $40 billion, like that we send overseas, like to Ukraine, and like that, and invest in public safety and law enforcement, we wouldn't be having these problems. Like if we would have taken some of these, like there is no research and development money available for public safety people.
Yeah.
It's just not there. And so we rely on forward-thinking companies to really spend the time, get their hands dirty, and be willing to risk and innovate for us to make this stuff happen. And then what I need law enforcement leaders to do is embrace it. Don't question everything and poo-poo, all these things because you don't understand it, or it might be hard to implement. You got to
Yeah.
wrap your arms around this, and you got to find the people inside your organizations that do understand it, that do get it, that can see the future coming and get after it. Like, so I'm excited. I know we're on our hard stop time, so if I better shut up now, or else we'll be here for another half hour, Lou.
No, we're good. I'd love to sit here and talk for hours. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the chance to share these ideas.
Well, you know what? It's been awesome. I'm so excited about where things are going. Again, thank you for all you're doing. Is there if for so someone that's interested in this, whether it's from a large scale security perspective or from a school shooter perspective, how can they reach you? How can they get in touch with you to learn more about this? And maybe if they're even interested in doing a pilot with you,
Sure.
what should
My email is Louis.Barani at ss-rc.com. It's LOUIS.BARANI at ss-rc.com.
All right. Are you on LinkedIn?
I am.
Okay, sometimes that's easy. People can find you. That's Louis Barani, I
Hi.
believe. Yep. All
Correct.
right. I did it right. Is that Italian? Barani? It's got to be Italian, isn't it?
Actually, I'm Cuban.
Cuban. Okay. Oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. All right, we'll leave that. That. Okay. Um, any closing thoughts? Anything I didn't ask that I should have that we can wrap up here real quick? Or are we good?
No, the important thing is don't be afraid of technology. I mean, look, you mentioned the negative aspects. Everybody's looking at the negative aspects of AI. Look at the negative aspects of a car.
Yeah.
pollution, death, but look at where it's taken us.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
You have to take there's good and bad in everything. There's never anything that's really good or really bad. So, you have to learn to manage both and control the situation as best you can.
Right on. All right. With that, we're going to wrap it up. That'll close it out for this episode of the Coptimizer Podcast. Again, lastly, one additional time, thank you, Lou, for spending some of your valuable time with us, helping us learn. I'm excited about where this is going. And until the next episode, we'll be 1042.